How do you distill over 25 years of Fallout game canon into just a few minutes? The Fallout games, and by extension, now its expanded TV universe as well, have an incredibly long and complex history. With 4 mainline games, spin-offs, and now an Amazon show set post-nuclear apocalypse, that's a shed load of radioactive storytelling to get through, so sit back and hold on, because we're going to explain it all. Our story begins in a slightly alternate mid-20th century. The Second World War, you may have heard of it, has just finished, but rather than getting on with celebrating, in Fallout's world, between 1945 and 1961, there's a technological boom, but in keeping with that distinctly 50s vibe that oozes out of Fallout's every irradiated pore. Oh, and a man called Robert House starts a company called Robco, creates Protectrons, the Sentry Bots, Fallout 3's Liberty Prime, and possibly Fallout's most iconic piece of tech, the wrist-mounted Pip-Boy. Mr. House will be important later. But back in the timeline, the Cold War, you may have heard of it, still happens, and with the threat of communism growing in the US, they make the smart decision to split from 50 states to 13 Commonwealths. And everything goes swimmingly from there. Except of course it doesn't. There's a whole war over resources, helpfully called the Resource War, leading to Europe declaring war on the Middle East. The US invades Mexico and annexes Canada, and China tries to invade Alaska. It's all very messy. In the year 2054, the US government and a secret organisation known as the Enclave commissions Vault-Tec and Robco to start working on Project Safehouse. 122 public vaults across America, with each vault capable of housing 1,000 US citizens from a potential nuclear cataclysm. Except no, they weren't, with each vault actually made to house bizarre social experiments. Many of these vaults opened in the years preceding the Great War of 2077, most notably Vault 76, and a lucky, or unlucky, chosen few are picked to enter the vaults should the worst happen. This is where the Fallout TV show begins to seep into the timeline as we see flashbacks to the pre-war days, and we're going to delve vaguely into the realms of spoilers for that here, so just a quick warning so you can avoid the worst, but suffice to say through the eyes of Cooper, before he becomes the Ghoul, we learn where Vault Boy comes from. Hooray! And the horrifying truth behind the vaults, their bizarre social experiments, and that Vault-Tec themselves plan on dropping the nukes. Boo. And so we finally reach Doomsday, October 23rd, 2077, and our first soiree into the games with Fallout 4's prologue. The world goes to pot, nukes are fired, and the world is destroyed. Very nice. Burning the world alive and allowing new species of horrifying monstrosities to haunt the wasteland. Thanks, humanity. You, playing as the sole survivor, are whisked with your wife and son Sean off to Vault 101, being funneled below ground just as a nuclear explosion decimates your surroundings. You throw on the iconic blue and yellow Vault suits and settle down for a long cryogenic-induced sleep. The whole of the US is obliterated by the nukes, including LA, as we see in the Fallout TV show, and while the world burns, everything calms right down again. Except no, it doesn't. 25 years after the bombs drop, the first vault door reopens. Helpfully, paradoxically, in the most recent Fallout game, we step out of Vault 76, a vault tasked with repopulating the wastes of West Virginia, although the task players are given by the Overseer is securing a metric butt-ton of nukes to deal with a group of monsters that have unhelpfully settled in the area called the Scorched. Annoyingly, Fallout 76's story is still technically being expanded upon, what with it being an active multiplayer game, but as quickly and as succinctly as possible, the 76ers managed to deep six the Scorched after discovering the creatures might have actually been man-made in a lab. People, and by that I mean NPCs, start to return to the region, which leads to a break between two major factions, the Raiders and the Settlers, and it's discovered that a huge amount of gold is being kept in nearby Vault 79, causing issues in just about every single way possible. We get our first introduction, canonically, to the Brotherhood of Steel, the super militaristic remnants of the US Army whose mission is securing as much technologically advanced pre-war weaponry and kit as possible, sporting their iconic power armor, obviously, and set up their new base of operations at Fort Atlas, and depending on the 76ers' decisions, they'll use the Brotherhood to keep Wastelanders safe or pursue their lust for pre-war weapons, all of which eventually leads to everything calming right down again. Except of course it doesn't, and we fly all the way back to 1997, or all the way forward to 2161, which is where we finally get to the events of the very first Fallout game and the adventures of the Vault Dweller. Born and raised within Vault 13, you're sent out into the wastelands of South California to find a replacement for a water chip which provides the vault with clean water, and slowly discover the secrets of the irradiated wastes, including Shady Sands, somewhere Fallout fans would become very well acquainted with over the course of the series and which appears to have been nuked in the Fallout TV series, a destroyed and abandoned Vault 15, and the ghoul-established city of Necropolis. Monstrous humans who have been irrevocably irradiated but still maintain some of their humanity, within which you'll find the water chip within the now defunct Vault 12. Over the course of the game, the Vault Dweller also encounters a veritable boatload of super mutants, their first mention in the series timeline, hulking monstrosities capable of easily taking down our plucky Vault Dweller, Dweller, and a massive threat linked to the quasi-religious group the Children of the Cathedral and their leader, another super mutant going by the name of the Master. The Vault Dweller sets about taking them all down under the orders of its overseer, finding out the Children of the Cathedral were kidnapping humans and turning them into super mutants using the forced evolutionary virus, with the end goal of spreading unity through the wastes and transforming all of humanity into monsters. Naturally, the Vault Dweller makes sure this doesn't happen and saves the day. Hooray! But they're ostracized by the overseer of their vault, who worries that their heroics will inspire future generations to leave the vault, and they're exiled to the wastes. Boo. Fast forward 30 odd years to 2197 and we arrive at Fallout Tactics, a game which helpfully is barely canon to the series, so we're not going to be here for long, and the same goes for Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. Nothing to see here. Let's keep going until we hit 2241 and the events of Fallout 2. The Vault Dweller from the first game chose a very simple life, settled in a small village on the west coast of America called Aria, had a family and promptly died, and we pick up down the road with one of his ancestors, canonically named the Chosen One. With the village suffering from a prolonged drought, the Chosen One is sent to find the Garden of Eden kit, or GECK for short, a piece of terraforming technology that is capable of creating life out of essentially nothing. And obviously in the name of narrative parallels, that means returning to Vault 13 from the first game and discovering it crawling with death claws. Fun! Fallout 2 also properly introduces two of the biggest factions in the Fallout lore, the NCR, or New California Republic, who have become the de facto leading faction in the now thriving settlement of Shady Sands, and the Enclave, basically what's left of the US government. The Enclave uses its supply of tech and weapons to try and rule what's left of their society, so naturally the Chosen One is out to knock them off their perch, making their way to the Enclave's base of operations, finding the residents of Arroyo, and plot twist, the Vault 13 residents being held captive, and just to really ruin their day, that the forced evolutionary virus from the original game has been transformed into an airborne variant. Seriously, f*** the Enclave. Thankfully, the Chosen One saves the captives, kills the head of the Enclave, and Vault 13 and Arroyo join together to create a new society founded on sunshine and rainbows using a newly founded GECK. Finally, a happy ending. Except no it isn't, because now it's 2258 and the Lone Wanderer in Vault 101 has just been born, kicking off Fallout 3, and we spend the next 19 years leveling up our baby into a full-grown vault-dwelling adult. Although 3 years before they hit their 19th birthday in the year of 2271, the first battle of the Hoover Dam occurs. Remember this, it will be important later. Anyway, back to Fallout 3, the year is 2277, your dad leaves the vault, supposedly the first to ever depart from Vault 101, although that turns out to be a lie, leaving you basically an orphan after your mother dies in childbirth. The Overseer overreacts, and we're forced out into the capital wasteland around good old Washington, D.C. The Lone Wanderer visits Megaton, a town built around a literal nuclear bomb that the locals have started to worship, visit the remains of Washington, D.C., which is now an absolute irradiated mess, but does have a sick radio station thanks to its enigmatic DJ, Three Dog, and a giant beached battleship called Rivet City. The revelations come fast for the Lone Wanderer, as they discover they weren't born in Vault 101, that the vault itself was built to never be opened, harking back to its social experiment origins, and that the Wanderer's father was once involved in something known as Project Purity, a giant water processing plant that helps feed clean water to the wider Washington DC area, and that is currently being warred over by the Enclave, led by AI President Henry Eden, and a Brotherhood of Steel splinter cell led by Owen Lyons. You track down your father to Vault 112, where the Wanderer releases him from the virtual reality experiment all of its residents are trapped in, and tries to revive Project Purity with a GECK, before all hell breaks loose. The Lone Wanderer's dad sacrifices himself to stop the Enclave from stealing the project, and although you do manage to find a GECK in Vault 87, usually with the help of best super mutant boy Fawkes, unless you're a monster, you get captured anyway. But not for long, as you break out of the Enclave's grasp just as they're ready to pollute the water supply with an anti-mutation variant of the forced evolutionary virus, assault the Enclave with the help of the Brotherhood of Steel's massive Iron Lad Liberty Prime, kill Colonel Augustus, or convince him to sod off if you're diplomatic, and either save Project Purity or let it die. Now, in the original Fallout 3, the Lone Wanderer basically had to die, since the button to save Project Purity was in a heavily irradiated area, and you were apparently the only one who could fix it. Thanks for nothing, Fawkes. The Broken Steel DLC fixed this little wrinkle though, and Fallout 3 got a lot of expansions to its story, travelling to the pit in former Pittsburgh, a virtual reality sojourn into a military simulation of the US victory over China during the Resource War, Broken Steel, which revamped that cop-out ending and let the Wanderer exact some revenge on those who remained from the Enclave, and two incredibly odd turns to solve an argument between a ghoul and a talking brain, and a trip on a UFO. And with that, Fallout 3 is finally done. As the Lone Wanderer takes in the success or failures of their decisions, we're moving on. Until 4 years later, where we go to Vegas, baby. The year is 2281 and the City of Sin lives on, even after a nuclear apocalypse. Remember that guy, Mr. Robert House, I mentioned a while back? Well, he's still alive, thanks to a stasis chamber in the Lucky 38 casino and a defense system that kept the nukes off of New Vegas, meaning that thanks to its closeness to the Hoover Dam, it's looking pretty good for a 200-year stint in a nuclear apocalypse. Enter stage right, the Courier, your protagonist for New Vegas, who's forced to navigate the tense politics of a New Vegas being pulled apart by factions. The New California Republic, who are no longer shackled to their base in Shady Sands and have a whole region of their own and want the as yet independent New Vegas as part of their territory. Then there's Caesar's Legion, styling itself on the ancient Roman Empire. They stand in defiance of the NCR, but they're not exactly good guys. They're extremists who want military dictatorship, so, you know, swings and roundabouts. Both these factions vie for power, with the main issue being the Hoover Dam, something Caesar's Legion made an unsuccessful attempt at taking control of back in 2271, like I said earlier. Now, you may be asking, what does our courier have to do with all this? Well, they get shot by a gangster called Benny, robbed of their delivery, the platinum chip, before they're unceremoniously dumped in a shallow grave. Not a good start, but they bounce back. Rescued by a robot and then nursed back to health by Doc Mitchell, the courier gets to work on a very simple task: kill Benny and get the platinum chip back. Because the platinum chip is very important, Benny wants to use it to get New Vegas right out from under the nose of his boss, Mr. House, and every other faction is dying to get their hands on it for the same reason, because it contains an upgrade program originally designed to help protect Vegas, but could be used to much more nefarious means if the user so desired. Which is why the New Vegas canon gets a bit harder to nail down here, as there are 4 different endings available depending on what faction you side with. There's a second battle for the Hoover Dam, with the courier on the attack for Caesar's Legion, on the defense with the NCR, sneaking in on the side with Mr. House, or claiming New Vegas as an independent territory with Benny, even though he shot you. Whatever the canon ending of the game is though, well, that's a whole other kettle of irradiated fish. And the Fallout TV show will likely answer a lot of questions that remain around it. But New Vegas got a few other story expansions to juice some lore from, including meeting Joshua Graham, the original burned man who is set on fire and thrown into the Grand Canyon by Caesar after he failed to take the Hoover Dam, and has inadvertently ended up a post-apocalyptic Mormon, being kidnapped by the suspended brains of a group of pre-war scientists to take part in an increasingly horrific series of experiments, and travelling to the Continental Divide, where we meet former courier Ulysses, who chose not to take the platinum chip to Mr. House and thus kicked off the events of Fallout New Vegas originally, and has some bad blood for our courier. But bad news for him, our courier always delivers. And just like that joke, the foreshadowing is finally about to land as well, as we hit 2287 and Fallout 4. Yes, it's time to catch up with the sole survivor who has spent the last 200 years sleeping soundly while the world went to hell. But the sole survivor very quickly makes up for lost time as they witness the murder of their spouse and kidnap of their son Sean, set off into the wastelands around Vault 101, where they meet Dogmeat, their new best canine boy, meet a new faction, and throw on some power armor to fight a Deathclaw. All very standard Monday morning after a long cryogenic sleep stuff. The sole survivor eventually makes it to Diamond City, built into the remains of Fenway Park, the Boston Sox home ground, where we're introduced to the idea of the Institute, some kind of terrorist group that replaces normal people with synths. Robots, made to look like humans, but I'm sure they won't come up again, right? Well, you're wrong! The sole survivor finds the man who kidnapped their son, Conrad Kellogg, which is a silly name, and he reveals that the Institute has Sean, which is far from a silly situation. Unfortunately, the only way into the Institute is via teleportation, which goes all the way back to silly again, and to get a teleporter, the sole survivor has to pick a side. The Minutemen, styled after American Revolutionary War soldiers, everyone's favourite power armor fantasists, the Brotherhood of Steel, or the Railroad, who are out to save and rehabilitate synths from the Institute. But regardless, all of this pales in comparison no matter who you choose, because it turns out the big bad in the sky at the Institute is none other than the sole survivor's son, Sean. Except now he goes by father, which seems confusing given our relationship with him, and was originally kidnapped to use his pre-war DNA in experiments on the synths. From there, our sole survivor has 2 options: agree to their son's offer of succeeding him since he has cancer and is not long for this world, or leave with their faction and, like many of Fallout's protagonists when it comes to solving problems, nuke it. The Fallout TV show, it seems, has made at least one of these endings canon, at least in terms of which faction you choose, because of a Brotherhood of Steel ship that's in the show. Namely, the Minutemen and Brotherhood of Steel endings for the game, since the ship in question is destroyed in all the others, but hey, who's keeping track? Oh, right, I am. But there's more, because of course there is. Fallout 4 got plenty of DLC, appropriately 4 expansions in total, with the sole survivor ending up in a war with a supervillain called the Mechanist, travelling to a spooky island to solve a missing persons case for some reason, getting featuring a Vault-Tec workshop which saw the Soul Survivor discover Vault 88, an unfinished bunker, and essentially makes the Soul Survivor an overseer, and Nuka World, where they clear out and run a ravaged theme park. Now that is the canon ending I'm looking for in my character. All of which finally leads us to the Fallout TV show and the year 2296. Well over 200 years after the timeline technically begins in the Fallout 4 prologue, filling us in on more of the lore around the California region, exploring the nature of Vault 33 and its neighbours, around which a seemingly idyllic society has formed. Nothing, I'm sure, could possibly go wrong. You'll get no more spoilers from me, so now you're all caught up on the entire Fallout games timeline, it might be time to go and watch the show. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you've made of the Fallout TV show so far and all the many controversies it seems to have caused. And while you're with us here at GG Recon, YouTube is recommending the perfect video just for you, so why not check that out right here.